Chapter 7, A Close-Knit Community. Each show started the same way. As Fred sang the opening song, he took off his jacket and hung it in the closet. Then he put on a cardigan sweater, usually one his mother had knitted. Next, he traded his dress shoes or loafers for a pair of sneakers. He might talk about caring for a pet, recycling, or sharing. He also talked about things children might worry about. Did a haircut hurt? Nope. He got one to prove it. What about a shot at the doctor's office? Yes, but only for a moment. In one famous episode, Fred assured children they could not get sucked down the bathtube drain. They were too big to fit. Fred also took field trips to interesting places like a crayon factory or a mushroom farm. He made films of these trips and showed them on Picture-Picture, a picture frame in Mr. Rogers' house that changed into a movie screen. A visit to the neighborhood of make-believe was always part of the program, too. The adventures of King Friday the 13th, Queen Sarah Saturday, and all the other puppets were always exciting for children. Fred thought kids needed both a little real and a little pretend in their lives. Who lives in the neighborhood? Hundreds of people and puppets appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood over the years. Some lived in the real world, some stayed in the neighborhood of make-believe, and some traveled back and forth. People. Mr. Mcfeely, named for Fred's real-life grandfather. Mr. Mcfeely worked for the Speedy Delivery Service and brought packages to Mr. Rogers' house. Officer Clemens. In the real neighborhood, Mr. Clemens ran a dance studio with his wife. He was a policeman in make-believe. Joe Negri. Mr. Negri owned a music store in the real neighborhood and worked as a handyman in make-believe. Betty Aberlin. Betty operated a local theater in the real neighborhood. In the neighborhood of make-believe, she became later Lady Aberlin, the king's niece. Puppets. King Friday the 13th. The ruler in make-believe was born on Friday the 13th. He had a good heart but was terribly bossy. Daniel Striped Tiger. A shy tiger who lived in a clock. Daniel was Fred's very first TV puppet character. Lady Elaine Fairchild. Lady Elaine ran a museum and could be a real troublemaker at times. Henrietta Pussycat. Henrietta was shy but helpful. She could say only a few words in English. She said meow for everything else. Fred always wanted to do what was best for his young audience. When he asked a question, he paused to let viewers think about the answer. Nothing that happened was very fast or zippy. When he first started doing the show, Fred flipped his shoes in the air as he was changing them. He stopped when he heard kids were copying him and bonking themselves on the head. Children saw the same familiar people and places in each episode. Fred showed them how important it was to have a community of friends and neighbors, but he sometimes introduced kids to a bigger world. One time, he invited astronaut Al Worden, who appeared on the show. Worden had been a crew member on Apollo 15, a mission that went to the moon in 1971. He showed kids how to put on a spacesuit and described what it was like to orbit the moon. In another episode, Fred went to the Soviet Union, now Russia, where he appeared on a similar children's program. At the time, the Soviet Union and the United States were in the middle of the Cold War. Both nations wanted to prevent the other from gaining too much power. Did that mean Soviet kids were bad or strange? Turns out they weren't. They were a lot like children in the United States. Fred wanted children to look up to him as a reliable adult. He was always friendly but never too casual. At the end of each program, Mr. Rogers sang again. It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling you're growing inside. The message was the same one his grandfather had told him years before. You are special. Fred believed that with all of his heart. And the children who watched his show believed it too.